Let's begin with Chapter 13, An Interview. No human creature stirred to go or come, no face looked forth from shut or open casement, no chimney smoked, there was no sign of home from parapet to basement. Hood. And so the days went on, until there came to be but 2 nights more before we were to leave our cave. Excuse me. Now I have said that the delay chafed us, because we were impatient to get at the treasure, but there was something else that vexed me and made me more unquiet with every day that passed, and this was that I had yet resolved to see Grace before I left these parts, and yet knew not how to tell it to Elzevir. But on this evening, seeing the time was grown so short, I knew that I must speak or drop my purpose, and so spoke. We were sitting like the seabirds on the ledge outside our cave, looking towards St. Alban's Head, and watching the last glow of sunset. The evening vapours began to sweep down channel, and Elzevir shrugged his shoulders. "The night turns chill," he said, and got up to go back to the cave. So then I thought my time was come, and following him inside, said, "Dear Master Elzevir, you have watched over me all this while, and tended me kinder than any father could his son, and 'tis to you I owe my life, and that my leg is strong again. Yet I am restless this night, and beg that you will give me leave to climb the shaft and walk abroad. It is 2 months and more that I have been in the cave, and see nothing but stone walls, and I would gladly tread once more upon the down." "See not that I have saved thy life," Elzevir broke in. "'Twas I who brought thy life in danger, and but for me thou mightst even now be lying snug abed at Moonfleet, instead of hiding in the chambers of these rocks. So speak not of that. But if thou hast a mind to owe thyself an hour, I see little harm in it. These wayward fancies fall on men as they get better of sickness, and I must go tonight to that ruined house of which I spoke to thee, to fetch a pocket compass Master Ratsey was to put there. So thou canst come with me and smell the night air on the down." He had agreed more readily than I looked for, and so I pushed the matter, saying, "Nay, master, grant me leave to go yet a little farther afield. You know that I was born in Moonfleet, and have been bred there all my life, and love the trees and stream and very stones of it, and I have set my heart on seeing it once more before we leave these parts for good and all. So give me leave to walk along the down and look on Moonfleet but this once, and in this ploughboy guise I shall be safe enough, and will come back to you tomorrow night." He looked at me a moment without speaking, and all the while I felt he saw me through and through, and yet he was not angry. But I turned red and cast my eyes upon the ground, and then he spoke. "Lad, I have known men risk their lives for many things, for gold and love and hate, but never one would play with death that he might see a tree or stream or stones. And when men say they love a place or a town—" Excuse me, that's Joey sneezing. Are you alright, buddy? I've lost my place now. And when men say they love a place or a town, or thou mayst be sure it is not the place they love, but some that live there, or that they loved some in the past, and so would see the spot again to kindle memory withal. Thus, when thou speakest of Moonfleet, I may guess that thou hast someone there to see, or hope to see. It cannot be thine aunt, for there is no love lost between ye, and besides no man ever perilled his life to bid adieu to an aunt. So have no secrets from me, John, but tell me straight, and I will judge whether this second treasure that thou seekest is true gold enough to fling thy life into the scale against it." Then I told him all, keeping nothing back, but trying to make him see that there was little danger in my visiting Moonfleet, for none would know me in a carter's dress, and that my knowledge of the place would let me use a hedge or wall or wood for cover, and finally, if I were seen, my leg was now sound, and there were few could beat me in a running match upon the down. So I talked on, not so much in the hope of convincing him as to keep saying something, for I durst not look up, and feared to hear an angry word from him when I should stop. But at last I had spoken all I could, and ceased because I had no more. Yet he did not break out as I had thought, but there was silence, and after a moment I looked up, and saw by his face that his thoughts were wandering. When he spoke there was no anger in his voice, but only something sad. Thou art a foolish lad, he said. Yet I was young once myself, and my ways have been too dark to make me wish to darken others, or try to chill young blood. Now, thine own life has got a shadow on it already that I have helped to cast, so take the brightness of it while thou mayst, and get thee gone. But for this girl, I know her for a comely lass and good-hearted, and have wondered often how she came to have him for her father. I am glad now that I have not his blood on my hands, and never would have gone to take it then, for all the evil he had brought on me, but that he lives, but that the lives of every mother's son hung on his life. So make thy mind at ease, and get thee gone, and see these streams and trees and stones thou talkest of. Yet if thou art shot upon the down, or taken off to jail, blame thine own folly and not me, and I will walk with thee to Purbeck gates tonight, and then come back and wait. But if thou art not here again by midnight tomorrow, I shall believe that thou art taken in some snare, and come out to seek thee. I took his hand, and thanked him with what words I could that he had let me go, and then got on the smock, putting some bread and meat in my pockets, as I was likely to find little to eat on my journey. It was dark before we left the cave, for there is little dusk with us, and the division between day and night sharper than in more northern parts. Elzevir took me by the hand and led me through the darkness of the workings, telling me where I should stoop and when the way was uneven. Thus we came to the bottom of the shaft, and looking up through ferns and brambles, I could see the deep blue of the sky overhead, and a great star gazing down full at us. We climbed the steps with the soapstone slide at one side, and then walked on briskly over the springy turf through the hillocks of the covered quarry heaps and the ruins of the deserted cottages. There was a heavy dew which got through my boots before we had gone half a mile, and though there was no moon, the sky was very clear, and I could see the veil of gossamers spread silvery white over the grass. Neither of us spoke, partly because it was safer not to speak, for the voice carries far in a still night on the downs, and partly, I think, because the beauty of the starry heaven had taken hold upon us both, filling our hearts with thoughts too big for words. We soon reached that ruined cottage of which Elzevir had spoken, and in what had once been an oven found the compass safe enough as Ratsey had promised. Then on again over the solitary hills, not speaking ourselves, and neither seeing light in window nor hearing dogs stir, until we reached that strange defile which men call the gates of Purbeck. Here is a natural road nicking the highest summit of the hill, with walls as sharp as if the hand of man had cut them, though which have walked for ages all the few travellers in this lonely place, shepherds and sailors, soldiers and excisemen. And although, as I suppose, no carts have been through it for centuries, there are ruts in the chalk floor as wide and deep as if the cars of giants used it in past times. So here Elzevir stops, and drawing from his bosom that silver-butted pistol of which I have spoken, thrust it in my hand. Here, take it, child, he said, but use it not till thou art closely pressed, and then, if thou must shoot, shoot low. It flings. I took it and grasped his hand, and so we parted, he going back to Purbeck, and I making along the top of the ridge at the back of Hoar Head. It must have been near 3 when I reached a great grass-grown mound, called Culliford Tree, that marks the resting-place of some old warrior of the past. The top is planted with a clump of trees that cut the skyline, and there I sat a while to rest, but not for long, for looking back towards Purbeck I could see the faint hint of dawn low on the sea line behind St. Alban's Head, and so pressed forward, knowing I had a full 10 miles to cover yet. Thus I travelled on, and soon came to the first sign of man, namely a flock of lambs being fed with turnips on a summer fallow. The sun was well up now, and flushed all with a rosy glow, showing the sheep and the roots they eat white against the brown earth. Still I saw no shepherd, nor even dog, and about 7 o'clock stood safe on Weatherbeach Hill that looks down over Moonfleet. Excuse me 1 second. The cat is now gone. There, at my feet, lay the Manor Woods, in the old house, and lower down the white road, and the straggling cottages, and farther still the Why Not, and the glassy Fleet, and beyond that the open sea. I cannot say how sad, yet sweet the sight was. It seemed like the mirage of the desert, of which I had been told, so beautiful, but never to be reached again by me. The air was still, and the blue smoke of the morning wood fires rose straight up, but none from the Why Not or manor house. The sun was already very hot, and I dropped at once from the hilltop, digging my heels into the brown-burned turf, and keeping as much as might be among the furze champs. So I was soon in the wood, and made straight for the little dell, and lay down there, burying myself in the wild rhubarb and burdocks, yet so that I could see the doorway of the manor house over the lip of the hill. Then I reflected what I was to do, or how I should get to speak with Grace, and thought I would first wait an hour or two and see whether she came out, and afterwards, if she did not, would go down boldly and knock at the door. This seemed not very dangerous, for it was likely, from what Ratsey had said, that there was no one with her in the house, and if there was, it would be but an old woman to whom I could pass as a stranger in my disguise, and ask my way to some house in the village. So I lay still, and munched a piece of bread, and heard the clock in the church tower strike 8, and afterwards 9, but saw no one move in the house. The wood was all alive with singing birds, and with the calling of cuckoo and wood-pigeon. There were deep patches of green shade and lighter patches of yellow sunlight, in which the iris leaves gleamed with a sheeny white, and a shimmering blue sea of ground ivy spread all through the wood. It struck 10, and as the heat increased the birds sang less, and the droning of the bees grew more distinct, and at last I got up, shook myself, smoothed my smock, and making a turn, came out on the road that led to the house. Though my disguise was good, I fear I made but an indifferent bad ploughboy when walking, and found a difficulty in dealing with my hands, not knowing how ploughboys are wont to carry them. So I came round in front of the house, and gave a rat-tat on the door, while my pulse beat as loud inside of me as ever did the knocker without. The sound ran round the building, and backwards among the walks, and all was silent as before. I waited a minute, and was for knocking again, thinking that there might be no one in the house, and then heard a light footstep coming along the corridor, yet durst not look through the window to see who it was in passing, as I might have done, but kept myself close to the door. The bolts were being drawn, and a girl's voice asked, "Who is there?" I gave a jump to hear that voice, knowing it well for Grace's, and had a mind to shout out my name, but then I remembered that there might be some in the house with her besides, and that I must remain disguised. Moreover, laughing is so mixed with crying in our world, and trifling things were serious, that even in this pass I believe I was secretly pleased to have to play a trick on her, and test whether she would find me out in this new dress or not. So I spoke out in our round Dorset speech, such as they talk it in the Vale, saying, "A poor boy who is out of his way." Then she opened one leaf of the door and asked me whither I would go, looking at me as one might at a stranger, and not knowing who I was. I answered that I was a farm lad who had walked from Purbeck, and sought an inn called the Why Not, kept by one Master Block. When she heard that, she gave a little start, and looked me over again, yet could make nothing of it, but said, "Good lad, if you will step on to this terrace, I can show you the Why Not Inn, but 'tis shut these 2 months or more, and Master Block away." With that she turned towards the terrace. I following, but when we were outside of earshot from the door, I spoke in my own voice, quick and low, "Grace, it is I, John Trenchard, who am come to say good-bye before I leave these parts, and have much to tell you would wish to hear. Are there any beside in the house with you?" Now many girls who had suffered as she had, and were thus surprised, would have screamed or perhaps swooned, but she did neither, only flushing a little, and saying, also quick and low, "Let us go to the back of the house. I am alone." So we went back, and after the door was bolted, took both hands and stood up face to face in the passage, looking into one another's eyes. I was tired, with a long walk and sleepless night, and so full of joy to see her again that my head swam and all seemed a sweet dream. Then she squeezed my hands, and I knew 'twas real, and was for kissing her for very love, but she guessed what I would be at, perhaps, and cast my hands loose, drawing back a little, as if to see me better, and saying, "John, you have grown a man in these 2 months." So I did not kiss her. But if it was true that I was grown a man, it was truer still that she was grown a woman, and as tall as I, and these recent sufferings had taken from her something of light and frolic girlhood, and left her with a manner more staid and sober. She was dressed in black, with longer skirts, and her hair caught up behind, and perhaps it was the morning frock that made her look pale and thin, as Ratsey said. So while I looked at her, she looked at me, and could not choose but smile to see my carter's smock, and as for my tanned face and hands, thought I had been hiding in some country underneath the sun, until I told her of the walnut juice. Then, before we fell to talking, she said it was better we should sit in the garden, for that a woman might come in to help her with the house, and anyway it was safer, so that I might get out at the back in case of need. So she led the way down the corridor and through the living part of the house, and we passed several rooms, and one little parlour lined with shelves and musty books. The blinds were pulled, but let enough light in to show a high-backed horsehair chair that stood at the table. In front of it lay an open volume and a pair of horn-rimmed spectacles that I had often seen on Maskew's nose, so I knew it was his study, and that nothing had been moved since last he sat there. Even now I trembled to think in whose house I was, and half expected the old attorney to step in and hale me off to jail, till I remembered how all my trouble had come about, and how I last had seen him with his face turned up against the morning sun. Thus we came to the garden, where I had never been before. It was a great square, shut in with a brick wall of 12 or 15 feet, big enough to suit a palace, but then ill-kept and sorely overgrown. I could spend long in speaking of that plot, how the flowers and fruit trees, pot herbs, spice, and simples all ran wild and intermixed. The pink brick walls caught every ray of sun that fell, and that morning there was a hushed close heat in it, and a warm breath rose from the strawberry beds, for they were then in full bearing. I was glad enough to get out of the sun when Grace led the way to a walk of medlar trees and quinces, where the boughs interlaced and formed an alley to a brick summer-house. This summer-house stands in the angle of the south wall, and by it 2 old fig trees, whose tops you can see from the outside. They are well known for the biggest and the earliest bearing of all that part, and Grace showed me how, if danger threatened, I might climb up their boughs and scale the wall. We sat in the summer-house, and I told her all that had happened at her father's death, only concealing that Elzevir had meant to do the deed himself, because it was no use to tell her that, and besides, for all I knew, he never did mean to shoot, but only to frighten. She wept again while I spoke, but afterwards dried her tears, and must needs look at my leg to see the bullet wound, and if it was all soundly healed. Then I told her of the secret sense that Master Ratsey's words put into the texts written on the parchment. I had showed her the locket before, but we had it out again now, and she read and read again the writing while I pointed out how the words fell, and told her I was going away to get the diamond and come back the richest man in all the countryside. Then she said, "Ah, John, set not your heart too much upon this diamond. If what they say is true, 'twas evilly come by, and will bring evil with it. Even this wicked man durst not spend it for himself, but meant to give it to the poor. So, if indeed you ever find it, keep it not for yourself, but set his soul at rest by doing with it what he meant to do, or it will bring a curse upon you." I only smiled at what she said, taking it to be a girlish fancy, and did not tell her why I wanted so much to be rich, namely, to marry her one day. Then, having talked long about my own concerns as selfishly as a man always does, I thought to ask after herself and what she was going to do. She told me that a month past lawyers had come to Moonfleet and pressed her to leave the place, and they would give her in charge to a lady in London, because, said they, her father had died without a will, and so she must be made a ward of Chancery. But she had begged them to let her be, for she could never live anywhere else than in Moonfleet, and that the air and commodity of the place suited her well. So they went off, saying that they must take direction of the court to know whether she might stay here or not. and here she yet was. This made me sad, for all I knew of Chancery was that whatever it put hand on fell to ruin, as witness the Chancery Mills at Kern, or the Chancery Wharf at Wareham, and certainly it would take little enough to ruin the manor house, for it was 3 parts in decay already. Thus we talked, and after that she put on a calico bonnet, and picked me a dish of strawberries, staying to pull the finest, although the sun was beating down from mid-heaven, and brought me bread and meat from the house. Then she rolled up a shawl to make me a pillow, and bade me lie down on the seat that ran round the summer-house, and get to sleep, for I had told her that I had walked all night, and must be back again at the cave come midnight. She went back to the house, and that was the most sweet and peaceful sleep that ever I knew, for I was very tired, and had this thought to soothe me as I fell asleep, that I had seen Grace, and that she was so kind to me. She was sitting beside me when I awoke, and knitting a piece of work. The heat of the day was somewhat less, and she told me that it was past 5 o'clock by the sundial, so I knew that I must go. She made me take a packet of victuals and a bottle of milk, and as she put it into my pocket the bottle struck on the butt of Maskew's pistol, which I had in my bosom. "What have you there?" she said, but I did not tell her, fearing to call up bitter memories. We stood hand in hand, as we had done in the morning, and she said, "John, you will wander on the sea, and may perhaps put into Moonfleet. Though you have not been here of late, I have kept a candle burning at the window every night, as in the past. So, if you come to beach on any night, you will see that light, and know Grace remembers you. And if you see it not, then know that I am dead or gone, for I will think of you every night till you come back again." I had nothing to say, for my heart was too full with her sweet words, and with the sorrow of parting but only drew her close to me and kissed her, and this time she did not step back, but kissed me again. Then I climbed up the fig tree, thinking it safer so to get out of the wall, and to go back to the front of the house. And as I sat on the wall, ready to drop the other side, turned to her and said, "Good-bye." "Good-bye," cried she, "and have a care how you touch the treasure. It was evilly come by, and will bring a curse with it." "Good-bye, good-bye," I said, and dropped on to the soft, leafy bottom of the wood. Chapter 14. The Well-house. For those thou mayest not look upon are gathering fast round the yawning stone. Scott. It wanted yet half an hour of midnight when I found myself at the shaft of the marble quarry, and before I had well set foot on the steps to descend, heard Elsevier's voice challenging out of the darkness below. I gave back, "Prosper to Bonaventure," and so came home again to sleep the last time in our cave. The next night was well suited to flight. There was a spring tide with full moon, and a light breeze setting off the land, which left the water smooth under the cliff. We saw the Bonaventure cruising in the channel before sundown, and after the darkness fell she lay close in and took us off in her boat. There were several men on board of her that I knew, and they greeted us kindly and made much of us. I was indeed glad to be among them again, and yet felt a pang at leaving our dear Dorset coast and the old cave that had been hospital and home to me for 2 months. The wind set us up channel, and by daybreak they put us ashore at Cowes, so we walked to Newport and came there before many were stirring. Such as we saw in the street paid no heed to us, but took us doubtless for some carter and his boy, who had brought corn in from the country for the Southampton packet, and were about early to lead a team home again. 'Tis a little place enough, this Newport, and we soon found the Bugle, but Elsevier made so good a carter that the landlord did not know him, though he had his acquaintance before, so they fenced a little with one another. "Have you bed and victuals for a plain country man and his boy?" said Elsevier. "Nay, that I have not," says the landlord, looking him up and down, and not liking to take in strangers who might use their eyes inside, and perhaps get on the trail of the contraband. 'Tis near the summer statute, and the place over full already. I cannot move, my gentleman, and would bid you try the wheat sheaf, which is a good house, and not so full as this. Aye, 'tis a busy time, and 'tis these fairs that make things prosper, said Elzevir. And Elzevir marked the last word a little as he said it. The man looked harder at him and asked, Prosper what? As if he were hard of hearing. Prosper the Bonaventure, was the answer. And then the landlord caught Elzevir by the hand, shaking it hard and saying, Why, you are Master Block, and I expecting you this morn, and never knew you. He laughed as he stared at us again, and Elzevir smiled too. Then the landlord led us in. And this is? He said, looking at me. This is a well-licked whelp, replied Elzevir, who got a bullet in the leg 2 months ago, and that touch into her head, and is worth more than he looks, for they have put 20 golden guineas on his head, so have a care for such a precious topknot. So long as we stopped at the Bugle, we had the best of lodgings, and the choicest meat and drink, and all the while the landlord treated Elzevir as though he were a prince. And so he was indeed a prince amongst the contrabandiers, and held, as I found out long afterwards, for captain of all landers between Start and Solent. At first the landlord would take no money of us, saying that he was in our debt, and had received many a good turn from Master Block in the past. But Elzevir had got gold from Dorchester before we left the cave, and forced him to take payment. I was glad enough to lie between clean, sweet sheets at night instead of on a heap of sand, and sit once more knife and fork in hand before a well-filled trencher. 'Twas thought best to show myself as little as possible, so I was content to pass my time in a room at the back of the house whilst Elzevir went abroad to make inquiries how we could find entrance to the castle at Carisbrooke. Nor did the time hang heavy on my hands, for I found some old books in the Bugle, and among them several to my taste, especially a history of Corfe Castle, which set forth how there was a secret passage from the ruins to some of the old marble quarries, and perhaps to that very one that sheltered us. Elzevir was out most of the day, so that I saw him only at breakfast and supper. He had been several times to Carisbrooke, and told me that the castle was used as a jail for persons taken in the wars, and was now full of French prisoners. He had met several of the turnkeys or jailers, drinking with them in the inns there, and making out that he was himself a carter, who waited at Newport till a wind-bound ship should bring grindstones from Lyme Regis. Thus he was able at last to enter the castle and to see Wellhouse and Well, and spent some days in trying to devise a plan whereby we might get at the well without making the man who had charge of it privy to our full design, but in this did not succeed. There is a slip of garden at the back of the Bugle which runs down to a little stream, and one evening, when I was taking the air there after dark, Elzevir returned and said the time was come for us to put Blackbeard's cipher to the proof. I have tried every way, he said, to see if we could work this secretly, but 'tis not to be done without the privity of the man who keeps the well, and even with his help it is not easy. He is a man I do not trust, but have been forced to tell him there is treasure hidden in the well, yet without saying where it lies or how to get it. Promises to let us search the well, taking 1/3 the value of all we find for his share. For I said not that thou and I were one at heart, but only that there was a boy who had the key and claimed an equal third with both of us. Tomorrow we must be up betimes, and at the castle gates by 6 o'clock for him to let us in. And thou shalt not be carter any more, but mason's boy, and I a mason. For I have got coats in the house, brushes and trowels and lime bucket, and we are going to Carisbrooke to plaster up a weak patch in this same well side. Elzevir had thought carefully over this plan, and when we left the Bugle next morning we were better masons in our splashed clothes than ever we had been farm servants. I carried a bucket and a brush, and Elzevir a plasterer's hammer and a coil of stout twine over his arm. It was a wet morning, and had been raining all night. The sky was stagnant and one-coloured without wind, and the heavy drops fell straight down out of a grey veil that covered everything. The air struck cold when we first came out, but trudging over the heavy road soon made us remember that it was July, and we were very hot and soaking wet when we stood at the gateway of Carisbrooke Castle. Here are 2 flanking towers, and a stout gatehouse reached by a stone bridge crossing the moat. And when I saw it, I remembered that 'twas here Colonel John Mohune earned the wages of his unrighteousness, and thought how many times he must have passed these gates. Elzevir knocked as one that had a right, and we were evidently expected, for a wicket in the heavy door was opened at once. The man who let us in was tall and stout, but had a puffy face and too much flesh on him to be very strong, though he was not, I think, more than 30 years of age. He gave Elzevir a smile, and passed the time of day civilly enough, nodding also to me, but I did not like his oily black hair, and a shifty eye that turned away uneasily when one met it. "Good morning, Master Wellright," he said to Elzevir. "You have brought ugly weather with you. Are you drowning wet? And a drowning wet. Will you take a sup of ale before you get to work?" Elzevir thanked him kindly, but would not drink, so the man led on, and we followed him. We crossed a bailey or outer court, where the rain had made the gravel very miry, and came on the other side to a door which led by steps into a large hall. This building had once been a banquet room, I think, for there was an inscription over it very plain in lead. He led me into his banquet hall, and his banner over me was love. I had time to read this while the turnkey unlocked the door with one of a heavy bunch of keys that he carried in his girdle. But when we entered, what a disappointment! For there were no banquets now, no banners, no love, but the whole place gutted and turned into a barrack for French prisoners. The air was very close, as where men had slept all night, and a thick steam on the windows. Most of the prisoners were still asleep, and lay stretched out on straw palliaces round the walls, but some were sitting up and making models of ships out of fish bones, or building up crucifixes inside bottles, as sailors love to do in their spare time. They paid little heed to us as we passed, though the sleepy guards, who were lounging on their matchlocks, nodded to our conductor, and thus we went right through that evil-smelling whitewashed room. We left it at the other end, went down 3 steps into the open air again, crossed another small court, and so came to a square building of stone with a high roof like the large dovecots that you may see in old stackyards. Here our guide took another key, and, while the door was being opened, Elzevir whispered to me, "It is the well house," and my pulse beat quick to think that we were so near our jail. Our goal, even, The building was open to the roof, and the first thing to be seen in it was that treadwheel of which Elzevir had spoken. It was a great open wheel of wood, 10 or 12 feet across, and very like a mill wheel, only the space between the rims was boarded flat, but had treads nailed on it to give foothold to a donkey. The patient beast was lying loose stabled on some straw in a corner of the room, and, as soon as we came in, stood up and stretched himself, knowing that the day's work was to begin. "He was here long before my time," the turnkey said, "and knows the place so well that he goes into the wheel and sets to work by himself." At the side of the wheel was a well mouth, a dark, round opening with a low parapet round it, rising 2 feet from the floor. We were so near our goal. Yet, were we near it at all? How did we know Mohune had meant to tell the place of hiding for the diamond in those words? They might have meant a dozen things beside, and if it was of the diamond they spoke, then how did we know the well was this one? There were 100 wells beside. These thoughts came to me, making hope less sure, and perhaps it was the steamy overcast morning and the rain, or scant breakfast, that beat my spirit down, for I have known men's mood change much with the weather and with food. But sure it was that now we stood so near to put it to the touch, I liked our business less and less. As soon as we entered, the turnkey locked the door from the inside, and when he let the key drop to its place, and it jangled with the others on his belt, it seemed to me he had us as his prisoners in a trap. I tried to catch his eye to see if it looked bad or good, but could not, for he kept his shifty face turned always somewhere else. And then it came to my mind that if the treasure was really fraught with evil, this coarse, dark-haired man, who could not look one straight, was to become a minister of ruin to bring the curse home to us. But if I was weak and timid, Elzevir had no misgivings. He had taken the coil of twine off his arm and was undoing it. "We will let an end of this down the well," he said, "and I have made a knot in it at 80 feet. This lad thinks the treasure is in the well wall 80 feet below us, so when the knot is on well lip we shall know we have the right depth." I tried again to see what look the turnkey wore when he heard where the treasure was, but could not, and so fell to examining the well. A spindle ran from the axle of the wheel across the well, and on the spindle was a drum to take the rope. There was some clutch or fastening which could be fixed or loosed at will to make the drum turn with the tread wheel, or let it run free, and a foot brake to lower the bucket fast or slow, or stop it altogether. "I will get into the bucket," Elzevir said, turning to me, "and this good man will lower me gently by the brake until I reach the string end down below. Then I will shout, and so fix you the wheel and give me time to search." This was not what I looked for, having thought that it was I should go, and though I liked going down the well little enough, yet somehow now I felt I would rather do that than have Master Elzevir down the hole, and me left locked alone with this villainous fellow up here. So I said, "No, master, this cannot be. 'Tis my place to go, being smaller and a lighter weight than thou, and thou shalt stop here and help this gentleman to lower me down." Elzevir spoke a few words to try and change my purpose, but soon gave in, knowing it was certainly the better plan, and having only thought to go himself, because he doubted if I had the heart to do it. But the turnkey showed much ill humour at the change, and strove to let the plan stand as it was, and for Elzevir to go down the well. Things that were settled, he said, should remain settled. He was not one for changes. It was a man's task, this, and no child's play. A boy would not have his senses about him, and might overlook the place. I fixed my eyes on Elzevir to let him know what I thought, and Master Turnkey's words fell lightly on his ears as water on a duck's back. Then this ill-eyed man tried to work upon my fears, saying that the well is deep and the bucket small. I shall get giddy and be overbalanced. I do not say that these forebodings were without effect on me, but I had made up my mind that, bad as it might be to go down, it was yet worse to have Master Elzevir prisoned in the well, and I remain above. Thus the turnkey perceived at last that he was speaking to deaf ears, and turned to the business. Yet there was one fear that still held me, for thinking of what I had heard of the quarry shafts in Purbeck, how men had gone down to explore, and there been taken with a sudden giddiness, and never lived to tell what they had seen, and so I said to Master Elzevir, "Art sure the well is clean, and that no deadly gases lurk below?" "Thou mayst be sure I knew the well was sweet before I let thee talk of going down," he answered, "for yesterday we lowered a candle to the water, and the flame burned bright and steady, and where the candle lives, there a man lives too. But thou art right, these gases change from day to day, and we will try the thing again. So bring the candle, Master Jailer." The jailer brought a candle fixed on a wooden triangle, which he was wont to show strangers who came to see the well, and lowered it on a string. It was not till then that I knew what a task I had before me, for looking over the parapet, and taking care not to lose my balance, because the parapet was low, and the floor around it green and slippery with water splashings, I watched the candle sink into the cavernous depths, and from a bright flame turn into a little twinkling star, and then to a mere point of light. At last it rested on the water, and there was a shimmer where the wood frame had set ripples moving. We watched it twinkle for a little while, and the jailer raised the candle from the water, and dropped down a stone from some he kept there for that purpose. The stone struck the wall half-way down, and went from side to side, crashing and whirring, till it met the water with a booming plunge, and there rose a groan and a moan from the eddies, like those dreadful sounds of the surge that I heard on lonely nights in the sea caverns underneath our hiding-place in Purbeck. The jailer looked at me then for the first time, and his eyes had an ugly meaning, as if he said, "There, that is how you will sound when you fall from your perch." But it was no use to frighten, for I had made up my mind. They pulled the candle up forthwith, and put it in my hand, and I flung the plasterer's hammer into the bucket, where it hung above the well, and then got in myself. The turnkey stood at the brake-wheel, and Elzevir leant over the parapet to steady the rope. "Art sure that thou canst do it, lad?" he said, speaking low, and put his hand kindly on my shoulder. "A head and heart, sure. Thou art my diamond, and I would rather lose all other diamonds in the world than aught should come to thee. So, if thou doubtest, let me go, or let not any go at all." "Never doubt, master," I said, touched by tenderness, and wrung his hand. "My head is sure. I have no broken leg to turn it silly now," for I guessed he was thinking of hoar head, and how I had gone giddy on the zigzag. Chapter 15. The Well. "The grave doth gape, and doting death is near." Shakespeare. The bucket was large, for all that the turnkey had tried to frighten me into thinking it small, and I could crouch in it low enough to feel safe of not falling out. Moreover, such a venture was not entirely new to me, for I had once been over Gad Cliff in a basket to get 2 peregrine's eggs. Yet, none the less, I felt ill at ease and fearful when the bucket began to sink into that dreadful depth, and the air to grow chilly as I went down. They lowered me gently enough so that I was able to take stock of the way the wall was made, and found that for the most part it was cut through solid chalk. But here and there, where the chalk failed or was broken away, they had lined the walls with brick, patching them now on this side, now on that, and now all round. By degrees the light, which was dim even overground that rainy day, died out in the well, till all was black as night but for my candle, and far overhead I could see the well mouth, white and round like a lustreless full moon. I kept an eye all the time on Elsevier's cord that hung down the well side, and when I saw it was coming to a finish, shouted to them to stop, and they brought the bucket up near level with the end of it. So I knew I was about 80 feet deep. Then I raised myself, standing up in the bucket and holding by the rope, and began to look around, knowing not all the while what I looked for, but thinking to see a hole in the wall, or perhaps the diamond itself shining out of a cranny. But I could perceive nothing, and what made it more difficult was that the walls here were lined completely with small flat bricks, and looked much the same all round. I examined these bricks as closely as I might, and took course by course, looking first at the north side, where the plumb line hung, and afterwards turning round in the bucket, till I was afraid of getting giddy. But to little purpose. They could see my candle moving round and round from the well-top, and knew no doubt what I was at, but Master Turnkey grew impatient, and shouted down, "What are you doing? Have you found nothing? Can you see no treasure?" "No," I called back, "I can see nothing." And then, "Are you sure, Master Block, that you have measured the plummet true to 80 feet? I heard them talking together, but could not make out what they said, for the bim-bom and echo in the well, till Elzevir shouted again, "I see this floor has been raised. You must try lower." Then the bucket began to move lower, slowly, and I crouched down in the dark, not wishing to look too much into the unfathomable, dark abyss below. And all the while there rose groanings and moanings from eddies in the bottom of the well, as if the spirits that kept watch over the jewel were yammering together that one should be so near it. And clear above them all I heard Grace's voice, sweet and grave. Have a care how you touch the treasure. It was evilly come by, and will bring a curse with it." But I had set foot on this way now, and must go through with it. So when the bucket stopped some 6 feet lower down, I fell again to diligently examining the walls. They were still built of the shallow bricks, and scanning them course by course as before, I could at first see nothing, but as I moved my eyes downward they were brought up by a mark scratched on a brick, close to the hanging plummet line. Now, however lightly a man may glance through a book, yet if his own name, or even only one like it, should be printed on the page, his eyes will instantly be stopped by it. So, too, if his name be mentioned by others in their speech, though it should be whispered never so low, his ears will catch it. Thus it was with this mark, for though it was very slight, so that I think not 1 in 1,000 would ever have noticed it at all, yet it stopped my eyes and brought up my thoughts suddenly, because I knew by instinct that it had something to do with me and what I sought. The sides of this well are not moist, green, or clammy, like the sides of some others where damp and noxious exhalations abound, but dry and clean, for it is said that there are below hidden entrances and exits for the water, which keep it always moving. So these bricks were also dry and clean, and this mark as sharp as if made yesterday, though the issue showed that 'twas put there a very long time ago. Now the mark was not deeply or regularly graven, but roughly scratched, as I have known boys score their names, or alphabet letters, or a date on the alabaster figures that lie in Moonfleet Church. And here, too, was scored a letter of the alphabet, a plain Y, and would have passed for nothing more perhaps to any not born in Moonfleet. But to me it was the cross-pole, or black Y of the Mohunes, under whose shadow we were all brought up. So as soon as I saw that, I knew I was near what I sought, and that Colonel John Mohune had put this sign there a century ago, either by his own hand or by those of a servant. And then I thought of Mr. Glennie's story, that the Colonel's conscience was always unquiet because of a servant whom he had put away, and now I seemed to understand something more of it. My heart throbbed fiercely, as many another's heart has throbbed when he has come near the fulfilment of a great desire, whether lawful or guilty, and I tried to get at the brick. But though by holding on to the rope with my left hand I could reach over far enough to touch the brick with my right, 'twas as much as I could do, and so I shouted up the well that they must bring me nearer in to the side. They understood what I would be at, and slipped a noose over the well rope, and so drew it to the side, and made it fast till I should give the word to loose again. Thus I was brought close to the well wall, and the marked brick near about the level of my face when I stood up in the bucket. There was nothing to show that this brick had been tampered with, nor did it sound hollow when tapped, though when I came to look closely at the joints, it seemed as though there was more cement than usual about the edges. But I never doubted that what we sought was to be found behind it, and so got to work at once, fixing the wooden frame of the candle in the fastening of the chain, and chipping out the mortar setting with this plasterer's hammer. When they saw above that first I was to be pulled into the side, and afterwards fell to work on the wall of the well, they guessed no doubt how matters were, and I had scarce begun chipping away when I heard the turnkey's voice again, sharp and greedy. "What are you doing? Have you found nothing?" It chafed me that this grasping fellow should be always shouting to me while Elzevir was content to stay quiet, so I cried back that I had found nothing, and that he should know what I was doing in good time. Soon I had the mortar out of the joints, and the brick loose enough to prise it forward, by putting the edge of the hammer in the crack. I lifted it clean out, and put it in the bucket to see later on, in case of need, if there was a hollow for anything to be hidden in, but never had occasion to look at it again, for there, behind the brick, was a little hole in the wall, and in the hole what I sought. I had my fingers in the wall too quick for words, and brought out a little parchment bag, for all the world like those dried fish eggs cast upon the beach, that children call shepherd's purses. Now, shepherd's purses are crisp and crackle to the touch, and sometimes I have known a pebble get inside one and rattle like a pea in a drum. And this little bag that I pulled out was dry too and crackling, and had something of the size of a small pebble that rattled in the inside of it. Only I knew well that this was no pebble, and set to work to get it out. But though the little bag was parched and dry, 'twas not so easily torn, and at last I struck off the corner of it with the sharp edge of my hammer against the bucket. Then I shook it carefully, and out into my hand there dropped a pure crystal as big as a walnut. I had never in my life seen a diamond either large or small, yet even if I had not known that Blackbeard had buried a diamond, and if we had not come hither of set purpose to find it, I should not have doubted that what I had in my hand was a diamond, and this of matchless size and brilliance. It was cut into many facets, and though there was little or no light in the well save my candle, there seemed to be in this stone the light of 1,000 fires that flashed out, sparkling red and blue and green, as I turned it between my fingers. At first I could think of nothing else, neither how it got there, nor how I had come to find it, but only of it, the diamond, and that, with such a prize, Elzevir and I could live happily ever afterwards. and that I should be a rich man and able to go back to Moonfleet. So I crouched down in the bottom of the bucket, being filled entirely with such thoughts, and turned it over and over again, wondering continually more and more to see the fiery light fly out of it. I was, as it were, dazed by its brilliance, and by the possibilities of wealth that it contained, and had, perhaps, a desire to keep it to myself as long as might be, so that I thought nothing of the two who were waiting for me at the well-mouth, till I was suddenly called back by the harsh voice of the turnkey, crying as before, "What are you doing? Have you found nothing?" "Yes," I shouted back, "I have found the treasure. You can pull me up." The words were scarcely out of my mouth before the bucket began to move, and I went up a great deal faster than I had gone down. Yet, in that short journey other thoughts came to my mind, and I heard Grace's voice again, sweet and grave. Have a care how you touch the treasure. It was evilly come by, and will bring a curse with it. At the same time I remembered how I had been led to the discovery of this jewel, first by Mr. Glennie's story, second by my finding the locket, and third by Ratsey giving me the hint that the writing was a cipher, and so had come to the hiding place without a swerve or stumble. And it seemed to me that I could not have reached it so straight without a leading hand, but whether good or evil, who should say? As I neared the top, I heard the turnkey urging the donkey to trot faster in the wheel, so that the bucket might rise the quicker, but just before my head was level with the ground, he set the brake on and fixed me where I was. I was glad to see the light again, and Elsevier's face looking kindly on me, but vexed to be brought up thus suddenly, just when I was expecting to set foot on terra firma. The turnkey had stopped me through his covetous eagerness, so that he might get sooner at the jewel, and now he craned over the low parapet and reached out his hand to me, crying, "Where is the treasure? Where is the treasure? Give me the treasure!" I held the diamond between finger and thumb of my right hand, and waved it for Elzevir to see. By stretching out my arm I could have placed it in the turnkey's hand, and was just going to do so, when I caught his eyes for the second time that day, and something in them made me stop. There was a look in his face that brought back to me the memory of an autumn evening, when I sat in my aunt's parlour reading the book called The Arabian Nights, and how, in the story of the wonderful lamp, Aladdin's wicked uncle stands at the top of the stairs when the boy is coming up out of the underground cavern, and will not let him out unless he first gives up the treasure. But Aladdin refused to give up his lamp until he should stand safe on the ground again, because he guessed that if he did, his uncle would shut him up in the cavern and leave him to die there. And the look in the turnkey's eyes made me refuse to hand him the jewel till I was safe out of the well, for a horrible fear seized me that as soon as he had taken it from me, he meant to let me fall down and drown below. So when he reached down his hand and said, "Give me the treasure," I answered, "Pull me up then. I cannot show it you in the bucket." "Nay, lad," he said, cozening me, "'tis safer to give it me now, and have both hands free to help you getting out. These stones are wet and greasy, and you may chance to slip, and having no hand to save you, fall back in the well." But I was not to be cheated, and said again sturdily, "No, you must pull me up first." Then he took to scowling and cried in an angry tone, "Give me the treasure, I say, or it will be the worse for you." But Elzevir would not let him speak to me that way, and broke in roughly, "Let the boy up. He is sure-footed and will not slip. 'Tis his treasure, and he shall do with it as he likes, only that thou shalt have a third of it when we have sold it." Then he, "'Tis not his treasure, no, nor yours either, but mine, for it is in my well, and I have let you get it. Yet I will give you a half share in it. But as for this boy, what is he to do with it? We will give him a golden guinea, and he will be richly paid for his pains." "Tush!" cries Elzevir, "let us have no more fooling. This boy shall have his share, or I will know the reason why." "Ay, you shall know the reason fair enough," answers the turnkey, "and 'tis because your name is Block, and there is a price of £50 upon your head, and £20 upon this boy's. You thought to outwit me, and are yourself outwitted, and here I have you in a trap, and neither leave this room except with hands tied and bound for the gallows, unless I first have the jewel safe in my purse." On that I whipped the diamond back into the little parchment bag, and thrust both down snug into my breeches pocket, meaning to have a fight for it anyway before I let it go. and looking up again I saw the turnkey's hand on the butt of his pistol and cried, "Beware! Beware! He draws on you!" But before the words were out of my mouth, the turnkey had his weapon up and levelled full at Elzevir. "Surrender!" he cried, "or I shoot you dead and the £50 is mine!" And never giving time for answer, fires. Elzevir stood on the other side of the well-mouth, and it seemed the other could not miss him at such a distance. But as I blinked my eyes at the flash, I felt the bullet strike the iron chain to which I was holding, and saw that Elzevir was safe. The turnkey saw it too, and flinging away his pistol, sprang round the well and was at Elzevir's throat before he knew whether he was hit or not. I have said that the turnkey was a tall, strong man, and 20 years the younger of the two, so doubtless when he made for Elzevir he thought he would easily have him broken down and handcuffed, and then turn to me. But he reckoned without his host, for though Elzevir was the shorter and older man, he was wonderfully strong and seasoned as a salted thong. Then they hugged one another and began a terrible struggle, for Elzevir knew that he was wrestling for life, and I dare say the turnkey guessed that the stakes were much the same for him too. As soon as I saw what they were at, and that the bucket was safe fixed, I laid hold of the well chain and, climbing up by it, swung myself onto the top of the parapet, being eager to help Elzevir and get the turnkey gagged and bound while we made our escape. But before I was well on the firm ground again, I saw that little help of mine was needed, for the turnkey was flagging, and there was a look of anguish and desperate surprise upon his face to find that the man he had thought to master so lightly was strong as a giant. They were swaying to and fro, and the jailer's grip was slackening, for his muscles were overwrought and tired. But Elzevir held him firm as a vice, and I saw from his eyes and the bearing of his body that he was gathering himself up to give his enemy a fall. Now I guessed that the fall he would use would be the Compton toss, for though I had never seen him give it, yet he was well known for a wrestler in his younger days, and the Compton toss for his most certain fall. I shall not explain the method of it, but those who have seen it used will know that 'tis a deadly fall, and he who lets himself get thrown that way, even upon grass, is seldom fit to wrestle another bout the same day. Still, 'tis a difficult fall to use, and perhaps Elzevir would never have been able to give it, had not the other, at that moment, taken one hand off the waist and tried to make a clutch with it at the throat. But the only way of avoiding that fall, and indeed most others, is to keep both hands firm between hip and shoulder blade, and the moment Elzevir felt one hand off his back, he had the jailer off his feet and gave him Compton's toss. I do not know whether Elzevir had been so taxed by the fierce struggle that he could not put his fullest force into the throw, or whether the other, being a very strong and heavy man, needed more to fling him. But so it was that instead of the turnkey going down straight as he should, with the back of his head on the floor, for that is the real damage of the toss, he must needs stagger backwards a pace or two, trying to regain his footing before he went over. It was those few staggering paces that ruined him, for with the last he came upon the stones close to the well-mouth, that had been made wet and slippery by continual spilling there of water. Then up flew his heels, and he fell backwards with all his weight. As soon as I saw how near the well-mouth he was got, I shouted out and ran to save him, but Elzevir saw it quicker than I, and, springing forward, seized him by the belt just when he turned over. The parapet wall was very low, and caught the turnkey behind the knee as he staggered, tripping him over into the well-mouth. He gave a bitter cry, and there was a wrench on his face when he knew where he was come, and 'twas then Elzevir caught him by the belt. For a moment I thought he was saved, seeing Elzevir setting his body low, with heels pressed firm against the parapet wall to stand the strain. Then the belt gave way at the fastening, and Elzevir fell sprawling on the floor, but the other went backwards down the well. I got to the parapet just as he fell head first into that black abyss. There was a second of silence, then a dreadful noise like a coconut being broken on a pavement, for we once had coconuts in plenty at Moonfleet, when the Batavia man came on the beach, then a deep, echoing blow, where he rebounded and struck the wall again, and last of all the thud and thundering splash when he reached the water at the bottom. I held my breath for sheer horror and listened to see if he would cry, though I knew at heart he would never cry again after that first sickening smash. But there was no sound or voice except the moaning voices of the water eddies that I had heard before. Elzevir slung himself into the bucket. "You can handle the brake," he said to me. "Let me down quick into the well." I took the brake lever, lowering him as quickly as I durst, till I heard the bucket touch water at the bottom, and then stood by and listened. All was still, and yet I started once, and could not help looking round over my shoulder, for it seemed as if I was not alone in the well-house, and though I could see no one, yet I had a fancy of a tall, black-bearded man with coppery face, chasing another around and round the well-mouth. Both vanished from my fancy just as the pursuer had his hand on the pursued, but Mr. Glennie's story came back again to my mind, how that Colonel Mahune's conscience was always unquiet because of a servant he had put away, and I guessed now that the turnkey was not the first man these walls had seen go headlong down the well. Elzevir had been in the well so long that I began to fear something had happened to him, when he shouted to me to bring him up. So I fixed the clutch and set the donkey going in the tread-wheel, and the patient drudge started on his round, recking nothing whether it was a bucket of water he brought up, or a live man, or a dead man, while I looked over the parapet and waited with a cramping suspense to see whether Elzevir would be alone, or have something with him. But when the bucket came in sight, there was only Elzevir in it, so I knew the turnkey had never come to the top of the water again, and, indeed, there was but little chance he should after that first knock. Elzevir said nothing to me till I spoke. "Let us fling the jewel down the well after him, Master Block. It was evilly come by, and will bring a curse with it." He hesitated for a moment, while I half hoped, yet half feared he was going to do as I asked, but then said, "No, no, thou art not fit to keep so precious a thing. Give it me. It is thy treasure, and I will never touch penny of it, but fling it down the well thou shalt not, for this man has lost his life for it, and we have risked ours for it. Ay, and may lose him for it too, perhaps." So I gave him the jewel. And that's the end of the chapter, and where I shall take the break for tonight. And Thunder, hey, welcome. Thank you for the sub. Thank you for the resub even. It's lovely to see you. I hope you're doing well. But yeah, that takes us to the break, and so I will send you on a break, and we'll see you back here in like 5 minutes or so. Thank you. seems like the first time in ages I'm actually back here before the end of the break and able to, like, just come back at the end of the break time, which is rare. But yeah, hello, welcome. I'm not going to talk for too long, obviously. I'm in the middle of reading, but I'll get back to that in a second. Thunder, lovely to see you. Yeah, I hope you're doing well. I know we did this before the break, but just to repeat myself. Also, Sil, I saw you sneak in literally right as I started reading. I don't know if you're still around or have bounced out, but yeah, good to see you as well. I also hope that you're doing well. Currently you have the idea of making a Venn diagram of bassists and the name James stuck in your head. You blame Mikey Way. I'm going to say I have no idea what that is anything to do with. You're going to apologise. You don't need to apologise. That is absolutely fine to say things I don't get. But yeah, I don't know what that is. But do please tell me more. It is a learning opportunity for me. So thank you. But I will probably learn those things after I finish reading, because I have so much more to get through today. What is? That's just an air bubble sitting on the top of my tea. I've moved from the whatever one I was having before that's like gingery and stuff to a China green sencha thing. It's really lovely. You don't need to say sorry. It's okay. Mikey Way is a basis to My Chemical Romance, and the middle name is James. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I know. I'm one of those people. I grew up with like everyone around me listening to My Chemical Romance. I never did myself, so I am clueless on that. But no, you do you. Thank you. Yeah, you don't need to apologise at all. Be you. Yeah. Do what you want to do. Talk about what you want to talk about. Absolutely fine. Please, you are welcome. But yeah, I'm going to carry on reading. It was the bit about the head making it sound like a coconut that nearly made me laugh. I hope I'm not the only one to which that description is very funny, even if it's describing the demise of a pretty unpleasant man. Also Paul McCartney and Drew Woolnough. I'm guessing that's Woolnough. Also middle name James. Right, okay, so there's just like a lot of bass players with the middle name of James. Got you. Okay. Now see, that makes sense now. Go ahead. Do the thing. Yeah, I agree. But yeah. No, I'll finish this steeping now. This will be fine. But yeah, this stream's going on a little bit longer, as you can see. By the time I've actually taken up like a full stream's worth of time doing the first half, but that is because this should leave us in position to finish this next week within sight of the end of the book, which would be nice. I like finishing things. But yeah, chair is creaking, tea is ready, Joey is surely going to interrupt us. So let us carry on with chapter 16, The Jewel. All that glitters is not gold. Shakespeare. There was the turnkey's belt lying on the floor, with the keys and manacles fixed to it, just as it had failed to come off him at the fatal moment. Elzevir picked it up, tried the keys till he found the right one, and unlocked the door of the well-house. "There are other locks to open before we get out," I said. "Aye," he answered, "but it's more than our life is worth to be seen with these keys, so send them down the well after the master." I took them back and flung them, belt and keys and handcuffs clanking down against the sides into the blackness and the hidden water at the bottom. Then we took pail and hammer, brush and ropes, and turned our backs upon that hateful place. There was the little court to cross before we came to the doors of the banquet hall. They were locked, but we knocked until the guard opened them. He knew us for the plasterer men who had passed an hour before, and only asked, "Where is Ephraim?" meaning the turnkey. "He is stopping behind the well-house," Elzevir said, and so he passed on through the hall, where the prisoners were making what breakfast they might of odds and ends, with a savoury smell of cooking and a great patter of French. At the outer gate was another guard to be passed, but they opened for us without asking a question, cursing Ephraim under their breath that he did not take the pains to let his own men out. Then the wicket of the great gate swung to behind us, and we went out into the open again. As soon as we were out of sight we quickened our pace, and the weather having much bettered and a fresh breeze springing up, we came back to Bugle about 10 in the forenoon. I believe that neither of us spoke a word during the walk, and though Elzevir had not yet seen the diamond, he never even took the pains to draw it out of the little parchment bag in which it still lay hid in his pocket. Yet if I did not speak, I thought, and my thoughts were sad enough, for here were we a second time flying for our lives, and if we had not the full guilt of blood upon our hands, yet blood was surely there. So this flight was very bitter to me, because the scene of death of which I had been witness this morning seemed to take me farther away still from all my old happy life, and to stand like another dreadful obstacle between Grace and me. In the family Bible, lying on the table in my aunt's best parlour, was a picture of Cain, which I had often looked at with fear on wet Sunday afternoons. It showed Cain striding along in the midst of a boundless desert, with his sons and their wives striding behind him, and their little children carried slung on poles. There was a quick, swinging motion in the bodies of all, as though they must needs always stride as fast as they might, and never rest, and their faces were set hard and thin with eternal wandering and disquiet. But the thinnest and most restless-looking and hardest-faced was Cain's, and on the middle of his forehead there was a dark spot which God had set to show that none might touch him, because he was the first murderer, and cursed forever. This had always been to me a dreadful picture, though I could not choose but look at it, and was sorry indeed for Cain, for all he was so wicked, because it seemed so hard to have to wander up and down the world all his life long, and never be able to come to moorings. And yet this very thing had come upon me now, for here we were, with the blood of 2 men on our hands, wanderers on the face of the earth, who durst never go home. And if the mark of Cain was not on my forehead already, I felt it might come out there at any minute. When we reached the Bugle, I went upstairs and flung myself upon the bed to try to rest a little and think, but Elzevir shut himself in with the landlord, and I could hear them talking earnestly in the room under me. After a while he came up and said that he had considered with the landlord how we could best get away, telling him that we must be off at once, but letting him suppose that we were eager to leave the place because some of the excise had got wind of our whereabouts. He had said nothing to our host about the turnkey, wishing as few persons as possible to know of that matter, but doubted not that we should by all means hasten our departure from the island, for that as soon as the turnkey was missed, inquiry would certainly be made for the plasterers with whom he was last seen. Yet in this thing at least fortune favoured us, for there was now lying at Cowes and ready to sail that night a Dutch cooper that had run cargo of Hollands on the other side of the island, and was going back to Scheveningen freighted with wool. Our landlord knew the Dutch captain well, having often done business with him, and so could give us letters of recommendation which would ensure us a passage to the Low Countries. Thus, in the afternoon we were on the road making our way from Newport to Cowes in a new disguise, for we had changed our clothes again, and now wore the common sailor dress of blue. The clouds had returned after the rain, and the afternoon was wet, and worse than the morning, so I shall not say anything of another weary and silent walk. We arrived on Cowes Quay by 8 in the evening, and found the cooper ready to make sail, and waiting only for the tide to set out. Her name was the Guden Droom, and she was little larger than the Bonaventure, but had a smaller crew, and was not near so well found. Elzevir exchanged a few words with the captain, and gave him the landlord's letter. After that they let us come on board, but said nothing to us. We judged that we were best out of the way, so went below, and finding her laden deep, and even the cabin full of bales of wool, flung ourselves on them to rest. I was so tired and heavy with sleep that my eyes closed almost before I was lain down, and never opened till the next morning was well advanced. I shall not say anything about our voyage, nor how we came safe to Scheveningen, because it has little to do with this story. Elzevir had settled that we should go to Holland, not only because the cooper was waiting to sail thither, for we might doubtless have found other boats before long to take us elsewhere, but also because he had learned at Newport that The Hague was the first market in the world for diamonds. This he told me after we were safe housed in a little tavern in the town, which was frequented by seamen, but those of the better class, such as mates and skippers of small vessels. Here we lay for several days, while Elzevir made such inquiry as he could without waking suspicion as to who were the best dealers in precious stones, and the most able to pay a good price for a valuable jewel. It was lucky, too, for us that Elzevir could speak the Dutch language, not well indeed, but enough to make himself understood and to understand others. When I asked where he had learned it, he told me that he came of Dutch blood on his mother's side, and so got his name of Elzevir, and that he could once speak in Dutch as readily as in English, only that his mother dying when he was yet a boy, he lost something of the facility. As the days passed, the memory of that dreadful morning at Carisbrooke became dimmer to me, and my mind more cheerful or composed. I got the diamond back from Elzevir, and had it out many times, both day and by night, and every time it seemed more brilliant and wonderful than the last. That's Joey, 1 second. Don't walk on the keyboard. Please don't walk on the computer. Thank you. I have to shepherd a cat. Where was I? Ah, yes. Elzevir. Only that his mother dying when he was yet a boy, he lost something at the facility. As the days passed, the memory of that dreadful morning at Carisbrooke became dimmer to me, and my mind more cheerful or composed. I got the diamond back from Elzevir and had it out many times, both by day and by night, and every time it seemed more brilliant and wonderful than the last. Often of nights, after all the house was gone to rest, I would lock the door of the room and sit with a candle burning on the table, and turn the diamond over in my hands. It was, as I have said, as big as a pigeon's egg or walnut, delicately cut and faceted all over, perfect and flawless, without speck or stain. And yet, for all it was so clear and colourless, there flew out from the depth of it such flashes and sparkles of red, blue, and green, as made one wonder whence these tints could come. Thus, while I sat and watched it, I would tell Elzevir stories from the Arabian Nights. Joey, what are you doing? No, don't crawl into the box. Stop. Of wondrous jewels, though I believe there never was a stone that the eagles brought up from the Valley of Diamonds, no, nor any in the Caliph's crown itself that could excel this gem of ours. You may be sure that at such times we talked much of the value that was to be put upon the stone, and what was likely to be got for it. No, don't go on the laptop. Don't do it. This is why we want to do professional recordings, because I don't want to be bitten by a cat. Thank you. You're being a bad cat, Joey. Stop it. Okay, he is corralled. Briefly. You may be sure that at such times we talked much of the value for that was to be put upon the stone, and what was like to be got for it, but never could settle, not having any experience of such things. Only I was sure that it must be worth thousands of pounds, and so sat and rubbed my hands, saying that though life was like a game of hazard, and our throws had hitherto been bad enough, yet we had made something of this last. But all the while a strange change was coming over us both, and our parts seemed turned about, for whereas a few days before it was I who wished to fling the diamond away, feeling overwrought and heavy-hearted in that awful well-house, and Elzevir who held me from it, now it was he that seemed to set little store by it, and I to whom it was all in all. He seldom cared to look much at the jewel, and one night when I was praising it to him, spoke out, "Set not thy heart too much upon this stone. It is thine, and thine to deal with. Never a penny will I touch that we may get for it. Yet, were I thou, and reached great wealth with it, and so came back one day to Moonfleet, I would not spend it all on my own ends, but put aside a part to build the poorhouses again, as men say Blackbeard meant to do with it." I did not know what made him speak like this, and was not willing, even in fancy, to agree to what he counselled, for, with that gem before me, lustrous and all the brighter for lying on a rough deal table, I could only think of the wealth it was to bring us, and how I would most certainly go back one day to Moonfleet and marry Grace. So I never answered Elzevir, but took the diamond and slipped it back in the silver locket, which still hung round my neck, for that was the safest place for it we could think of. We spent some days in wandering round the town making inquiries, and learnt that most of the diamond buyers lived near one another in a certain little street, whose name I have forgotten, but that the richest and best known of them was one Crispin Alderbrand. He bought and sold some of the finest stones, was said to ask few questions, and to trouble little whence stones came, so they were but good. Thus, after much thought and many changes of purpose, we chose this Alderbrand, and settled we would put the matter to the touch with him. I don't know what is up with my reading tonight. We took an evening in late summer for our venture, and came to Alderbrand's house about an hour before sundown. I remember the place well, though I have not seen it for so long, and am certainly never like to see it again. It was a low house of 2 stories standing back a little from the street, with some wooden palings and a grass plot before it, and a stone-flagged path leading up to the door. The front of it was whitewashed with green shutters, and had a shiny-leaved magnolia trained round about the windows. These jewellers had no shops, though sometimes they set a single necklace or bracelet in a bottom window, but put up notices proclaiming their trade. Thus there was over Alderbrand's door a board stuck out to say that he bought and sold jewels, and would lend money on diamonds or other valuables. A sturdy serving man opened the door, and when he heard our business was to sell a jewel, left us in a stone-floored hall or lobby, while he went upstairs to ask whether the master would see us. A few minutes later the stairs creaked, and Alderbrand himself came down. He was a little wizened old man with yellow skin and deep wrinkles, not less than 70 years old, and I saw he wore shoes of polished leather, silver-buckled and tilted-heeled, to add to his stature. He began speaking to us from the landing, not coming down into the hall, but leaning over the handrail. "Well, my sons, what would you with me? I hear you have a jewel to sell, but you must know I do not purchase sailors' flotsam. So if 'tis a moonstone or cat's eye or some pinhead diamonds, keep them to make brooches for your sweethearts, for Alderbrand buys no toys like that." He had a thin and squeaky voice, and spoke to us in our own tongue, guessing, no doubt, that we were English from our faces. 'Twas true, he handled the language badly enough, yet I was glad he used it so that I could follow all that was said. "No toys like that," he said again, repeating his last words, and Elzevir answered, "May it please your worship, we are sailors from oversea, and this boy has a diamond he would sell." I had the gem in my hand already, and when the old man squeaked peevishly, "Out with it then, let's see, I reached it out to him. He stretched down over the banisters and took it, holding out his palm hollowed, as if 'twas some little paltry stone that might otherwise fall and be lost. It nettled me to have him thus underrate our treasure, even though he had never seen it, and so I plumped it down into his hand, as if it were as big as a pumpkin. Now the hall was a dim place, being lit only by a half-circle of glass over the door, and so I could not see very well. Yet in reaching down he brought his head near mine, and I could swear his face changed when he felt the size of the stone in his hand, and turned from impatience and contempt to wonder and delight. He took the jewel quickly from his palm, and held it up between finger and thumb, and when he spoke again his voice was changed as well as his face, and had lost most of the sharp impatience. "There is not light enough to see in this dark place. Follow me." And he turned back and went upstairs rapidly, holding the stone in his hand, and we close at his heels, being anxious not to lose sight of him now that he had our diamond, for all he was so rich and well known a man. Thus we came to another landing, and there he flung open the door of a room which looked out west, and had the light of the setting sun streaming in full flood through the window. The change from the dimness of the stairs to this level red blaze was so quick that for a minute I could make out nothing, but turning my back to the window saw presently that the room was panelled all through with painted wood, with a bed let into the wall on one side, and shelves round the others, on which there were many small coffers and strong boxes of iron. Yes, Joey. The jeweller was sitting at a table with his face to the sun, holding the diamond up against the light, and gazing into it closely, so that I could see every working of his face. The hard and cunning look had come back to it, and he turned suddenly upon me, and asked quite sharply, "What is your name, boy? Whence did you come?" Now I was not used to walk under false names, and he took me unawares, so I must needs blurt out, "My name is John Trenchard, sir, and I come from Moonfleet in Dorset." A second later I could have bitten off my tongue for having said as much, and saw Elzevir frowning at me to make me hold my peace. But 'twas too late then, for the merchant was writing down my answer in a parchment ledger. And though it would seem to most but a little thing that he should thus take down my name and birthplace, and only vexed us at the time, because we would not have it known at all whence we came, yet in the overrulings of Providence it was ordered that this note in Mr. Alderbrand's book should hereafter change the issue of my life. "From Moonfleet in Dorset," he repeated to himself as he finished writing my answer. "And how did John Trenchard come by this?" And he tapped the diamond as it lay on the table before him. Then Elzevir broke in quickly, fearing no doubt lest I should be betrayed into saying more. "Nay, sir, we are not come to play at questions and answers, but to know whether your worship will buy this diamond, and at what price. We have no time to tell long histories, and so must only say that we are English sailors, and that the stone is fairly come by." And he let his fingers play with the diamond on the table, as if he feared it might slip away from him. "Softly, softly," said the old man. "All stones are fairly come by, but had you told me whence you got this, I might have spared myself some tedious tests, which now I must crave pardon for making." He opened a cupboard in the panelling, and took out from it a little pair of scales, some crystals, a black stone, and a bottle full of green liquid. Then he sat down again, drew the diamonds gently from Elzevir's fingers, which were loath to part with it, and began using his scales, balancing the diamond... Okay, Joey, 1 second. You must excuse me, my cat is restless. And began using his scales, balancing the diamond carefully, now against a crystal, now against some small brass weights. I stood with my back to the sunset, watching the red light fall upon this old man as he weighed the diamond, rubbed it on the black stone, or let fall on it a drop of the liquor, and so could see the wonder and emotion fade away from his face, and only hard craftiness left in it. I watched him meddling till I could bear to watch no longer, feeling a fierce, feverish suspense as to what he might say, and my pulse beating so quick that I could scarce stand still. For was not the decisive moment very nigh when we should know from these parched-up lips the value of the jewel, and whether it was worth risking life for, whether the fabric of our hopes was built on sure foundation or on slippery sand? So I turned my back on the diamond merchant and looked out of the window, waiting all the while to catch the slightest word that might come from his lips. I found then, and at other times, that in such moments, though the mind be occupied entirely by one overwhelming thought, yet the eyes take in, as it were unwittingly, all that lies before them, so that we can afterwards recall a face or landscape of which at the time we took no note. Thus it was with me that night, for though I was thinking of nothing but the jewel, yet I noted everything that could be seen through the window, and the recollection was of use to me later on. The window was made in the French style, reaching down to the floor, and opening like a door with 2 leaves. It led on to a little balcony, and now stood open, for the day was still very hot, and on the wall below was trained a pear tree, which half embowered the balcony with its green leaves. The window could be well protected in this case, in so it could be well protected in case of need, having latticed wooden blinds inside, and heavy shutters shod with iron on the outer wall, and there were besides strong bolts and sockets from which ran certain wires whose use I did not know. Below the balcony was a square garden plot, shut in with a brick wall, and kept very neat and trim. There were hollyhocks round the walls, and many coloured poppies, with many other shrubs and flowers. My eyes fell on one especially, a tall, red-blossomed, rushy kind of flower that I had never seen before, and that seemed indeed to be something out of the common, for it stood in the middle of a little earth plot, and had the whole bed nearly to itself. I was looking at this flower, not thinking of it, but wondering all the while whether Mr. Alderbrand would say the diamond was worth £10,000, or 50, or 100,000, when I heard him speaking and turned round quick. "My sons, and you especially, son John," he said, and turned to me, "this stone that you have brought me is no stone at all, but glass, or rather paste, for so we call it. Not but what it is good paste, and perhaps the best that I have seen, and so I had to try to make sure. But against high chymic tests no sham can stand. And first it was too light in weight, and second, when rubbed on this basanus or blackstone, traces no line of white, as any diamond must. But third and last, I have tried it with the hermeneutic proof, and dipped it in this mostly costly lembic, and the liquor remains pure green and clear, not turbid orange as a diamond leaves it." As he spoke, the room spun round, and I felt the sickness and heart-sinking that comes with the sudden destruction of long-cherished hope. So it was all a sham, a bit of glass, for which we had risked our lives. Blackbeard had only mocked us even in his death, and from rich men we were become the poorest outcasts, and all the other bright fancies had been built on this worthless thing fell down at once, like a house of cards. There was no money now with which to go back rich to Moonfleet, no money to cloak past offences, no money to marry Grace. And with that I gave a sigh, and my knees, failing, should have fallen, had not Elzevir held me. "Nay, son John," squeaked the old man, seeing I was so put about, "take it not hardly, for though this is but paste, I say not it is worthless. It is as fine work as ever I have seen, and I will offer you 10 silver crowns for it, which is a goodly sum for a sailor lad to have in hand, and more than all the other buyers in this town would bid you for it." "Tush, tush!" cried Elzevir, and I could hear the bitterness and disappointment in his voice, however much he tried to hide it. "We are not come to beg for silver crowns, so keep them in your purse. And the devil take this shining sham. We are well quit of it. There is a curse upon this thing." And with that he caught up the stone and flung it away out of the window in his anger. This brought the diamond buyer to his feet in a moment. "You fool! You cursed fool!" he shrieked. "Are you come here to beard me? And when I say the thing is worth 10 silver crowns, do you fling it in the winds?" I had sprung forward with the half thought of catching Elzevir's arm, but it was too late. The stone flew up in the air, caught the low rays of the setting sun for a moment, and then fell among the flowers. I could not see it as it fell, yet followed with my eyes the line in which it should have fallen, and thought I saw a glimmer where it touched the earth. It was only a flash or sparkle for an instant, just as the stem of that same rushy red-flowered plant, and then nothing more to be seen. But as I faced round, I saw the little man's eyes turned that way too, and perhaps he saw the flash as well as I. "There's for your 10 crowns, said Elzevir. "Let's be going, lad." And he took me by the arm and marched me out of the room and down the stairs. "Go, and a blight on you," says Mr. Alderbrand, his voice being not so high as when he cried out last, but in his usual squeak. And then he repeated, "A blight on you," just for a parting shot as we went through the door. We passed 2 more waiting men on the stairs, but they said nothing to us, and so we came to the street. We walked along together for some time without a word, and then Elzevir said, "Cheer up, lad, cheer up. Thou saidst thyself thou fearedst there was a curse on the thing, so now it is gone. Maybe we are well quit of it." Yet I could not say anything, being too much disappointed to find the diamond was a sham, and bitterly cast down at the loss of all our hopes. It was all very well to think there was a curse upon the stone so long as we had it, and to feign that we were ready to part with it. But now it was gone, I knew that at heart I never wished to part with it at all, and would have risked any curse to have it back again. There was supper waiting for us when we got back, but I had no stomach for victuals, and sat moodily while Elzevir ate, and he not much. But while I sat and brooded over what had happened, a new thought came to my mind, and I jumped up and cried, "Elzevir, we are fools! The stone is no sham! 'Tis a real diamond!" He put down his knife and fork and looked at me, not saying anything, but waiting for me to say more, and yet did not show so much surprise as I expected. Then I reminded him how the old merchant's face was full of wonder and delight when first he saw the stone, which showed he thought it was real then, and how afterwards, though he schooled his voice to bring out long words to deceive us, he was ready enough to spring to his feet and shriek out loud when Elzevir threw the stone into the garden. I spoke fast, and in talking to him convinced myself, so when I stopped for want of breath I was quite sure that the stone was indeed a diamond, and that Alderbrand had duped us. Still, Elzevir showed little eagerness, and only said, "'Tis like enough that what you say is true, but what would you have us do? The stone is flung away." "Yes," I answered, "but I saw where it fell, and know the very place. Let us go back now at once and get it." "Do you not think that Alderbrand saw the place too?" asked Elzevir, and then I remembered how, when I turned back to the room after seeing the stone fall, I caught the eyes of the old merchant looking the same way, and how he spoke more quietly after that, and not with the bitter cry he used when Elzevir tossed the jewel out of the window. "I do not know," I said doubtfully. "Let us go back and see. It fell just by the stem of a red flower that I marked well. What?" I added, seeing him still hesitate and draw back. "Do you doubt? Shall we not go and get it?" Still he did not answer for a minute, and then spoke slowly as if weighing his words. "I cannot tell. I think that all you say is true, and that this stone is real. Nay, I was half of that mind when I threw it away, and yet I would not say we are not best without it. 'Twas you who first spoke of a curse upon the jewel, and I laughed at that as being a childish tale. But now I cannot tell. For ever since we first scented this treasure, luck has run against us, John. Yes, run against us very strong, and here we are, flying from home, called outlaws, with blood upon our hands. Not that blood frightens me, for I have stood face to face with men in fair fight, and never felt a death blow given so weigh on my soul. But these two men came to a tricksy kind of end, and yet I could not help it. 'Tis true that all my life I have served the contraband, but no man ever knew me do a foul action, and now I do not like that men should call me felon, and like it less that they should call thee felon too. Perhaps there may be after all some curse that hangs about this stone, and leads to ruin those that handle it. I cannot say, for I am not a Parson Glennie in these things, but Blackbeard in an evil mood may have tied the treasure up to be a curse to any that use it for themselves. What do we want with this thing at all? I have got money to be touched at need. We may lie quiet this side of the channel where thou shalt learn an honest trade, and when the mischief is blown over we will go back to Moonfleet. So let the jewel be, John. Shall we not let the jewel be?" He spoke earnestly, and most earnestly at the end, taking me by the hand and looking me full in the face. But I could not look him back again, and turned my eyes away, for I was wilful and would not bring myself to let the diamond go. Yet all the while I thought that what he said was true, and I remembered that sermon that Mr. Glennie preached, saying that life was like a Y, and that to each comes a time when two ways part, and where he must choose whether he will take the broad and sloping road or the steep and narrow path. So now I guessed that long ago I had chosen the broad road, and now was but walking farther down it, in seeking after this evil treasure, and still I could not bear to give all up, and persuaded myself that it was a child's folly to madly fling away so fine a stone. So instead of listening to good advice from one so much older than me, I set to work to talk him over, and persuade him that if we got the diamond again, and ever could sell it, we would give the money to build up the Mohune almshouses, knowing well in my heart that I never meant to do any such thing. Thus, at the last, Elzevir, who was the stubbornest of men, and never yielded, was overborne by his great love to me, and yielded here. It was 10 o'clock before we set out together to go again to Alderbrand's, meaning to climb the garden wall and get the stone. I walked quickly enough and talked all the time to silence my own misgivings, but Elzevir hung back a little and said nothing, for it was sorely against his judgment that he came at all. But as we neared the place I ceased my chatter, and so we went on in silence, each busy with his own thoughts. We did not come in front of Alderbrand's house, but turned out of the main street down a side lane, which we guessed would skirt the garden wall. There were few people moving even in the streets, and in this little lane there was not a soul to meet as we crept along in the shadow of the high walls. We were not mistaken, for soon we came to what we judged was the outside of Alderbrand's garden. Here we paused for a minute, and I believe Elzevir was for making a last remonstrance, but I gave him no chance, for I had found a place where some bricks were loosened in the wall face, and set myself to climb. It was easy enough to scale for us, and in a minute we both dropped down in a bed of soft mould on the other side. We pushed through some gooseberry bushes that caught the clothes, and distinguishing the outline of the house made that way, till in a few steps we stood on the pelouse, or turf, which I had seen from the balcony 3 hours before. I knew the twirl of the walks and the pattern of the beds, the rank of the hollyhocks that stood up all along the wall, and the poppies breathing out a faint, sickly odour in the night. An utter silence held all the garden, and, the night being very clear, there was still enough light to show the colours of the flowers when one looked close at them, though the green of the leaves was turned to grey. We kept in the shadow of the wall, and looked expectantly at the house, but no murmur came from it. It might have been a house of the dead for any noise the living made there, nor was there light in any window, except in one behind the balcony, to which our eyes were turned first. In that room there was someone not yet gone to rest, for we could see a lattice of light where a lamp shone through the open work in the wooden blinds. "He is up still," I whispered, "and the outside shutters are not closed." Elzevir nodded, and then I made straight for the bed where the red flower grew. I had no need of any light to see the bells of that great rushy thing, for it was different from any of the rest, and beside that it was planted by itself. I pointed it out to Elzevir. "The stone lies by the stalk of that flower," I said, "on the side nearest to the house," and then I stayed him with my hand upon his arm, that he should stand where he was at the bed's edge while I stepped on and got the stone. My feet sank in the soft earth as I passed through the fringe of poppies circling the outside of the bed, and so I stood beside the tall rushy flower. The scarlet of its bells was almost black, but there was no mistaking it, and I stooped to pick the diamond up. Was it possible? Was there nothing for my outstretched hands to finger except the soft, rich loam, and on the darkness of the ground no guiding sparkle? I knelt down to make more sure, and looked all round the plant, and still found nothing, though it was light enough to see a pebble, much more to catch the gleam and flash of the great diamond I knew so well. It was not there, and yet I knew I had seen it fall beyond all room for doubt. "It's gone, Elzevir, it is gone!" I cried out in my anguish, but only heard a "Hush!" from him to bid me not to speak so loud. Then I fell on my knees again, and sifted the mould through my fingers to make sure the stone had not sunk in and been overlooked. It was all to no purpose, and at last I stepped back to where Elzevir was, and begged him to light a piece of match in the shelter of the hollyhocks, and I would screen it with my hand so that the light should fall upon the ground and not be seen from the house, and so search round the flower. He did as I asked, not because he thought that I should find anything, but rather to humour me, and as he put the lighted match into my hands, said, speaking low, "Let the stone be, lad, let it be, for either thou didst fail to mark the place aright, or others have been here before thee. 'Tis ruled we should not touch the stone again, and so 'tis best. Let be, let us get home." He put his hand upon my shoulder gently, and spoke with such an earnestness and pleading in his voice that one would have thought it was a woman rather than a great rough giant. And yet I would not hear, and broke away, sheltering the match in my hollowed hands, and making back to the red flower. But this time, just as I stepped upon the mould coming to the bed from the house side, the light fell on the ground, and there I saw something that brought me up short. It was but a dint, or impress, on the soft brown loam, and yet, before my eyes were well upon it, I knew it for the print of a sharp heel. A sharp, deep heel having just in front of it the outline of a little foot. There is a story every boy was given to read when I was young, of Crusoe, wrecked upon a desert isle, who, walking one day on the shore, was staggered by a single footprint in the sand, because he learnt thus that there were others in that sad place, where he thought he stood alone. Yet I believe even that footprint in the sand was never greater blow to him than was this impress in the garden mould to me, for I remembered well the little shoes of polished leather, with their silver buckles and high tilted heels. He had been here before us. I found another footprint, and another leading toward the middle of the bed, and then I flung the match away, trampling the fire out in the soil. It was no use searching farther now, for I knew well there was no diamond here for us. I stepped back to the lawn and caught Elzevir by the arm. "Aldobrand has been here before us and stole away the jewel," I whispered sharp, and looking wildly round in the still night, saw the lattice of lamplight shining through the wooden blinds of the balcony window. "Well, there's an end to it," said he, "and we are saved further question. 'Tis gone, so let us cry good riddance to it and be off." So he turned to go back. Then there was one more chance for me to choose the better way and go with him. But still I could not give the jewel up, and must go farther on the other path which led to ruin for us both. For I had my eyes fixed on the light coming through the blinds of that window, and saw how thick and strong the boughs of the pear tree were trained against the wall about the balcony. "Elzevir," I said, swallowing the bitter disappointment which rose in my throat, "I cannot go till I have seen what is doing in that room above. I will climb to the balcony and look in through the chinks. Perhaps he is not there. Perhaps he has left our diamond there, and we may get it back again." So I went straight to the house, not giving him time to raise a word to stop me, for there was something in me driving me on, and I was not to be stopped by anyone from that purpose. There was no need to fear any seeing us, for all the windows except that one were tight shuttered, and though our footsteps on the soft lawn woke no sound, I knew that Elzevir was following me. It was no easy task to climb the pear tree, for all that the boughs looked so strong, for they lay close against the wall, and gave little hold for hand or foot. Twice or more an unripe pear was broken off, and fell rustling down through the leaves to earth, and I paused and waited to hear if anyone was disturbed in the room above. But all was deathly still, and at last I got my hand upon the parapet, and so came safe to the balcony. I was panting from the hard climb, yet did not wait to get my breath, but made straight for the window to see what was going on inside. The outer shutters were still flung back, as they had been in the afternoon, and there was no difficulty in looking in, for I found an opening in the lattice blind just level with my eyes, and could see all in the room inside. It was well lit, as for a marriage feast, and I think there were a score of candles or more burning in holders on the table or in sconces on the wall. At the table, on the farther side of it from me and facing the window, sat Aldobrand, just as he sat when he told us the stone was a sham. His face was turned towards the window, and as I looked full at him it seemed impossible but that he should know that I was there. In front of him, on the table, lay the diamond. Our diamond. My diamond, for I knew it was a diamond now and not false. It was not alone, but had a dozen more cut gems laid beside it on the table, each a little apart from the other. Yet there was no mistaking mine, which was thrice as big as any of the rest. And if it surpassed them in size, how much more did it excel in fieriness and sparkle? All the candles in the room were mirrored in it, and as the splendour flashed from every line and facet that I knew so well, it seemed to call to me, "Am I not queen of all diamonds of the world? Am I not your diamond? Will you not take me to yourself again? Will you not save me from this sorry trickster?" I had my eyes fixed, but still knew that Elzevir was beside me. He would not let me risk myself in any hazard alone without he stood by me himself to help in case of need. And yet his faithfulness but galled me now, and I asked myself with a sneer, am I never to stir hand or foot without this man to dog me? The merchant sat still for a minute, as though thinking, and then he took one of the diamonds that lay on the table, and then another, and set them close beside the great stone, pitting them, as it were, with it. Yet how could any match with that? For it outshone them all as the sun outshines the stars in heaven. Then the old man took the stone and weighed it in the scales, which stood on the table before him, balancing it carefully in a dozen times against some little weights of brass. And then he wrote with pen and ink in a sheepskin book, and afterwards on a sheet of paper as though casting up numbers. What I would not have given to see the figures that he wrote! For was he not casting up the value of the jewel, and summing out the profits he would make? After that he took the stone between finger and thumb, holding it up before his eyes and placing it now this way, now that, so that the light might best fall on it. I could have cursed him for the wandering love of that fair jewel that overspread his face, and cursed him 10 times more for the smile upon his lips, because I guessed he laughed to think how he had duped 2 simple sailors that very afternoon. There was the diamond in his hands, our diamond, my diamond, in his hands, and I had but 2 yards from my own only a flimsy veil of wood and glass to keep me from the treasure that he had basely stolen from us. Then I felt Elsevier's hand upon my shoulder. "Let's be going," he said. "A minute more and he may come to put these shutters to, and find us here. Let us be going. Diamonds are not for simple folk like us. This is an evil stone, and brings a curse with it. Let us be going, John." But I shook off the kind hand roughly, forgetting how he had saved my life and nursed me for many weary weeks and stood by me through bad and worse. For just now the man at the table rose and took out a little iron box from a cupboard at the back of the room. I knew that he was going to lock my treasure into it, and then I should see it no more. But the great jewel lying lonely on the table flashed and sparkled in the light of 20 candles and called to me, "Am I not am I not queen of all diamonds in the world? Am I not your diamond? Save me from the hands of this scurvy robber." Then I hurled myself forward with all my weight, full on the joining of the window frames, and in a second crashed through the glass, and through the wooden blind into the room behind. But the noise of splintered wood and glass had not died away before there was a sound as of bells ringing all over the house, and the wires I had seen in the afternoon dangled loose in front of my face. But I cared neither for bells nor wires, for there lay the great jewel flashing before me. The merchant had turned sharp round at the crash and darted for the diamond, crying, "Thieves! Thieves! Thieves!" He was nearer to it than I, and as I dashed forward our hands met across the table, with his underneath the stone, but I gripped him by the wrist, and though he struggled he was but a weak old man, and in a few seconds I had twisted it from his grasp. In a few seconds... But before they were past or the diamond was well in my hand, the door burst open, and in rushed 6 sturdy serving men with staves and bludgeons. Elsevier had given a little groan when he saw me force my window. So I forced the window, but followed me into the room and was now at my side. "Thieves! Thieves! Thieves!" screamed the merchant, falling back, exhausted in his chair, and pointed to us. And then the knaves fell on too quick for us to make for the window. 2 set on me and 4 on Elsevier, and 1 man, even a giant, cannot fight with 4, above all when they carry staves. Never had I seen Master Block overborne or worsted by any odds. And fortune was kind to me at least in this, that she let me not see the issue then, for a staff caught me round a knock on the head as made the diamonds drop out of my hand, and laid me swooning on the floor. And that brings us to the end of the reading for tonight. Thank you for listening.